Hi guys, well in this video I'm going to discuss how to win the game of life, and I was inspired by a guy I picked up in my cab early one morning last week. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning, it was dark, and when we pick somebody up that early in the morning it tends to be either somebody who's just finished drinking or it's a drugs run because they want some more drugs. So I was expecting the worst. A guy gets in, he was sober, young lad, 18, 19-year-old maybe, and I said, "You had a good night?" He said, "Well, I've been in Fourth Bank's Nick all night," which is the local cop shop in Newcastle. And I says, "Oh, I've been a naughty boy. What have you done?" He says, "Possession of Class A drugs." He says, "I only had a couple of bags of cocaine for personal use." And that didn't quite make sense to me. I said, "Well, what were you doing in order for the police to stop you to find the bags?" And he said, "Oh, well, I'd broken curfew. What I hadn't noticed, he had a tag on." And I says, "Oh," and we had a bit more chat. And I said, "Yeah, you're not stupid, are you?" He said, "I beg your pardon?" I said, "Well, judging by your sentence structure, you're quite bright." And he just shrugged his shoulders. And I said, "So therefore you have to ask yourself why it is you're behaving the way you are." Which is a pretty dumb thing to say, because what the hell do I know? He could have been fiddled with as a kid or something, something awful. But we had a bit further chat and he got out. But one of the things it did tell me was that he was losing the game of life. If there is a game of life, then he was definitely losing it, and he was losing it from a very early age. And that type of person, like him, you can see on the high streets of any town or city that you live in. They'll be 11 o'clock in the morning, they'll be off their nuts, their jogging pants tucked into their socks, and you see them everywhere. They're in plain sight. You know they are losing the game of life. But there's some other groups of people who are losing the game of life, and it's not so easy to detect them. There's another large group of people who are losing the game of life, and these are normal people, average people. They'll work 40 hours a week, 9 to 5, 2 weeks in Benidorm every year. They'll work like that for 40 or 50 years until they get to 68, I think it is, retirement age now, where if they've been investing in their workplace pension, will have amassed enough to live on half pay for the rest of their lives. Now, to me, if you only get one shot at life, that's losing the game of life. There's another large group of people who look like they're winning the game of life, and you'll find these people on private estates, terraced, semi-detached, detached houses that have all the trappings of someone who is winning the game of life. They have the couple of leased cars on the driveway, they go on holiday a couple of times a year, good jobs, dress well, go out drinking two or three times a week because they can afford to do it. They have the income that will allow them to live that lifestyle. But often what they're doing is funding a lifestyle that is beyond their means, and they fund that difference on credit cards. So whilst they can look like they're winning the game of life, they're actually losing the game of life. Footballers would be a good example. Footballers make astonishing amounts of money. But did you know that 3 out of 5 footballers who make more than £30,000 a week go bust when they leave Premiership football? And that's because they spend way more than they earn. They're not very bright. That doesn't help either. And also they tend to get divorced when they leave the game, which there's half the money gone. But they're examples of people who look like they're winning the game of life but are actually losing it. But those who are winning the game of life, they're very difficult to detect as well. And that's because they don't have the accoutrements of wealth. They don't waste money unnecessarily on branded clothes. They don't buy or lease brand new cars. They'll have a beat up car or perhaps take public transport. They don't go on holiday. They save a lot of their money rather than spend it. And that's because they haven't yet won the game of life, but they're definitely winning it. And it'll be easy to fool yourself into seeing someone who's driving a brand new car compared to someone who's driving a beat up car, to think that the first one is winning the game of life and the second one is losing the game of life, when in actual fact it could easily be the other way around. It could be that the guy at McDonald's flipping burgers has an outstanding plan to become wealthy and is winning the game of life. It could be that the cab driver who got into cabbing because he couldn't afford a car but is now working 75 hours a week, 7 days a week, is winning the game of life. We shouldn't judge. So how do you win the game of life? Well, it's quite simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. You spend less than you earn and you invest the balance. And those winning the game of life by a large margin spend a lot less than they earn and invest that. It might not look like they're winning the game of life, but that's because the game isn't yet over. the question you have to ask yourself is, are you winning the game of life? Don't be stupid, don't be normal, guys.